I haven't seen it yet. What are we doing? Hi, panelists. Welcome, everyone. We're still waiting for all of our panelists. Thank you so much for coming. This is so exciting. We're happy to get this event started soon. We're still waiting for our panelists. I am from right here. There it is, New Zealand. Yes, this is the sign for New Zealand. Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Good evening. So glad that you can be here today. Let's go ahead and get another panelist to join. Any other panelists want to pop up and say hello?
Yes, I love your fan. It's beautiful. Hi, welcome.
Hi there, Miracle. So where are you from? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I'm from
Where's that?
Nigeria.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so when you see Nigeria, picture Africa. It's just on that left coast area. And that's where Nigeria is located. That's very cool. Oh, wonderful. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Miracle. And we are going to go ahead and introduce another panelist. Hello. Hi there. What's going on? Oh, say, what's your name? And tell us a little bit about your country and where you're from. Good evening, everyone. Hi there. My name's Natalie, and I am actually from Colombia. Yeah, this is how you sign Colombia. So when you think of North America and South America, that's exactly where Colombia is located. And I moved here to America. Yeah. So what we do is we call it LSC. So L, sign, and then C for Colombia. So Colombia Sign Language is referred to as LSC.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming.
Oh, awesome. Okay, who else is going to introduce themselves today? Thank you so much, Natalie, for being here. And who is next? Hello, hi there, and welcome. Good evening. So tell us who you are and what country you're representing today. Hi there, everyone. My name is Maida. This is my sign name. And I was actually born in Rwanda. This is what we signed for Rwanda. Oh, okay, great. Yeah, so when you think of location, we are just kind of in the middle of Africa. And currently, I'm in Finland. Yeah,
Finland, okay.
in Northern Europe. Oh, I don't even want to talk about how cold it is here right now. And that's a little bit about me for now. Yes,
Thank you so
much for being here, Maida. All right. What about Hudson? Can we see Hudson to the front? Hudson, where are you? Hey, what's going on, everyone?
Hi, welcome.
Hey, thanks so much for being here. Hi there, everyone. My name is Hudson Asima. This is how you sign my name. I am actually here representing Kenya. This is how we sign Kenya. Yeah, so Kenya Sign Language is called KSL. Oh, wow, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you again for being here. So when you think of Africa and where Kenya is located, where is it exactly? Kenya's actually on the east part of Africa, closer to the east coast, right by the water.
Oh, okay.
Oh, great. Awesome. Thank you so much. So next person we're going to go ahead and introduce to everyone is Zara. Hello, it's nice to see everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Oh, let's just make sure everyone can see you. Can everyone see me? Great. All right.
Perfect. There we are.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Zara Hussein, and I am actually from Pakistan. Yeah. So when you think of Russia, you move a little bit to the east. That's where you're seeing Pakistan located, kind of near India, Russia area, but that's where I'm from. Yeah, I'm more central based. Yeah, not too far north, not too far south or east or west, just central.
Oh, interesting.
And what we say is we say Punjab, right? That's kind of the area. So Pakistan has 4 different provinces. And I'm actually from Punjab. And that's a little bit about me and where I'm from. As far as my sign language goes, we call it PSL, Pakistan Sign Language. So what is your name sign though, Zara? Or we also call it ISL. So Zara, do you spell your name? Do you have a name sign of any kind? No name sign for me. Just Zara, Z-A-R-A is enough for me.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here, Zara. Thank you so much for the introduction. Oh, happy to be here. Okay, great. So now, before we go ahead and continue and begin the panelist questions, what I want to do now is have a quick announcement while we've got some people here. Now, Kayla, do you know what the announcement is? Well, we're actually here representing DHHSC, the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Service Center. We do have an event coming up soon. And what we like to share with you today is we're going to be having our Valley Deaf Festival. Ooh, yay, VDF. When are we having our Valley Deaf Festival? So VDF is going to be November 19th, and it's going to be from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. And it's actually going to be located in the Fresno Fairgrounds. That's amazing. Okay, so the reason why I asked, about that today was because we have Deaf Awareness Week just strictly this week. But if you want to purchase tickets, you actually can get them at a discounted rate right now. Next week, the price goes back to our regular prices. But for Deaf Awareness Week, we are offering a discount. Maybe you guys are wondering, well, how do I pay? You can call DHHSC, you can send an email, you can show up, or, there are other options. Other than that, After next week, prices do go up to regular price, but we are thrilled to be hosting another annual Valley Deaf Festival. And for some of you who do want to pay maybe through PayPal, keep in mind that our PayPal right now, the tickets end up being full price. There are no discounted rates through PayPal. If you want to pay for PayPal, feel free to reach any staff member through DHHSC. And what we can do is we can give you an invoice, and what we can do is we can reach out to our accountant. We can give you that invoice at a discounted rate. And then what you can do is you can just pay over the phone or online. But thank you so much for listening to that short announcement. And we hope to see you there, Valley Deaf Fest, Fresno Fairgrounds, November 19th. Great. So now that we're done with introductions, we've talked about VDF, I am ready to get to know some of these panelists. Keep in mind that we will call their names. We will go ahead and spotlight that panelist. And then what we can do is, ask the questions and hear these amazing answers. So first question that we're going to go ahead and ask. Are you guys ready? All right. Chris, Kayla, take it away. So the first question for each of you. Does your country's government recognize your sign language? Is your country aware of accessibility needed for the deaf community? An example of that would be maybe here in America, our government does recognize American Sign Language. So it's kind of a yes/no answer. So it's more of a 50-50. We do have an official sign language. However, there are other states who do not recognize sign language.
Can you hear me?
Some people, are kind of confused about that. But let me go ahead and repeat my question. Does your country and the government recognize sign language? And is your country aware of accessibility needs for the deaf? And let's go ahead and ask Monica. And this is my name sign again. Yeah, Monica, just like that. Great. Yeah, so to go ahead and answer that question, I'm from New Zealand. And in 2006, so that was almost 15 years ago, right? Since 2006, it's the same as America. It's kind of a 50-50, right? We do have interpreters for things like work, meetings, other things like that, which is great. The government will pay for those type of interpreting services when it comes to work and meetings and other things. But when it's other things like family events or friends, things that may be considered social, they will not always approve an interpreter and fund that interpreter. Just recently, the deaf community did fight with the government to finally try, when you think about having access, right? We fought for that and the government was resistant and we tried to fight back. So about 2 years ago, after everything happened with COVID and all of these public announcements were being made, deaf people needed to be included and they finally provided a sign language interpreter, right? We didn't want captioning. We didn't want something that was not accessible. So the government did recognize that TVs and news channels did need to provide access through a sign language interpreter, which was great because that provided information for the deaf community. And that's obviously got to be a big challenge, right? Thinking about everyone agreeing with that and that it was a challenge, but to show the government that we, the deaf community, recognize that language is important, right? And thank you so, so much for sharing that. And let's go ahead and take it away to the next panelist. Let's go ahead and get Natalie. Hi there, Natalie. Okay. Yep, sure, no problem. Happy to answer that question. So here in Colombia, we did notice that yes, sign language is recognized and validated as a language. It was 1996. Colombia finally did give permission for the use of sign language in schools and universities, so on and so forth. But the rules and the numbers, I think it was law number 324, meaning that deaf people had the right to sign, and there was no more oppression or discrimination or anything of that nature, which was great for us because we were, we were the only country in the world where sign language wasn't really recognized. And so it finally affirmed that for us. In regards to accessibility, some yes and some no, as far as the government recognizing the needs for access. When you think about, things on TV and public information, sometimes there is access, but yeah, it's not full access, right? There may be an interpreter in a bubble, or maybe sometimes, but not always. But if there is someone speaking, we should have access to an interpreter signing that information, right? So we're making improvement, but we're not there yet. When it comes to Colombia, we have something called, what is it called? I'm trying to think of the name here, forgive me. It's the International Institute for the Deaf or something along those lines, but it's all pertaining to education, right? And the need for access. An example of that would be, maybe there's a company, machine company or a school or support needs out there. When you think about other companies that are owned, it is their responsibility to work and remind the public that we do need access, right? That we need that information to be shared, right? So not just with hearing people, with the deaf community, and how that's done is, right, in different people and different support systems out there, but we have to remind the government constantly. Oh, wow, that's really, really important. So when you think about, all of the fighting and the work that you've had to do. Yeah, so in 1996, that law was passed, Law 324, and basically it was that different companies needed to show and verify that they had deaf people that needed access. There's a lot of discrimination, a lot of resistance, and we have made those improvements. It's a challenge though, right? When you think about that, having to show up and show everyone that access is important. Let's go ahead and take it away to the next panelist.
Hi, Hudson. Thank you.
Hi there, everyone. My name's Hudson. So as far as my country recognizing sign language, there's nothing that's been just yet, right? It's kind of a 50-50 for me as well in Kenya. So far, we have fought for things like access, information, and to have interpreters on TV and on news streams. So we have had that, saying that all of the news anchors and channels out there must have an interpreter, right? But unfortunately, it's not a 24/7 type of service. When it comes to the news and the information, they don't always have an interpreter ready and available. They oftentimes, right, when there are presidents giving speeches or making appearances or things like that, again, there's not always an interpreter. They aren't following the rules and the standards and providing that access. Sometimes we have interpreters, right? Maybe in the morning for like morning information, morning news streams, things like that, but not always.
Yeah, that's the same thing here in America. We don't always have access to interpreters 24/7 on the news.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a specific time, or if there's a specific event, if there's like a wildfire or an earthquake, and they do provide interpreters, but it's not something that's regularly offered on the news.
Right, exactly.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's move on to the next panelist. Go ahead.
Hi there. So my country, Rwanda, the government does not really recognize sign language. It was in 2004, I believe. They did discriminate against sign language, sign language, they made a sign language dictionary. However, the process to get there and to even get that dictionary, the idea of access and inclusion, right? When we think about television access, needing an interpreter, there are limitations though, right? Not everything is access, like the news or things like that. You don't see an interpreter when you turn on the TV and watch the news. When it comes to schools, hospital settings, there's not always an interpreter available. There's a huge delay and they need to catch up, right? It's going to be a long process. But now Finland, oh my gosh, what can I say? Finland is the most inclusive world, right? There's access everywhere. The deaf community is completely recognized, validated. There's an official, how do I say this? There's thousands of languages, right? But I'm just thankful to the access that Finland provides on TV, in hospitals, in school settings, in free time, there's interpreters available and it's free, it's free. They don't have to pay for interpreting services. I remember one year there was an interpreter that was, it was 18 or 19 or something along those lines, but the numbers went down and they're around now. They're here, they're present, they're visible, and we see them and they recognize us. And it's been an easy process in terms of accessibility.
We have noticed the difference too between what is offered in Rwanda and Finland, right? And the experience is both good and bad for each country. Very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. If we can get our next panelist, Zara, please. Yes, hi. Can you repeat the question, please? Oh, yes. Okay. So, yes, here in my country, there was, they had the disability law passed in the 80s. And there have been different variety of groups of people who have disabilities. So it was recognized by the government, but that is the medical view. So, right, that deaf people need hearing aids, that they need speech therapy, right? And so it focuses more on the medical perspective. And then compared to now, there is a huge emphasis on speech and hearing aids. And that's really the only thing we've seen over the years. So yes, it's been a long time and not much has changed. But what's interesting now is the sign language has changed and it continues to be developed, and people are being able to use it and set it up nonprofits, set up businesses. There's interpreting services now. They teach sign language, and it's Pakistani sign language. And now there are 2 interpreting agencies being run without government support. So deaf people are able to use either service to make phone calls for doctors and schools, make appointments for work or anything like that. And it's not a service that's provided 24/7, but at least it is provided. And Pakistani Sign Language is still not a recognized language. So we are still working on that and gaining more rights. And the Pakistani government understanding of what, so in other provinces, right? Like I mentioned before, there's different provinces, and there are other provinces or states that are more advanced in terms of having that knowledge about deaf people and deafness. And so, yes, we're still working on it. Yes, and I think it's come a long way, it seems to, and hopefully there'll continue to be more improvement. So thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. If we can now have Miracle for this question. Okay, hi. Do you need me to repeat the question? No, I'm good. Sorry. I'll introduce myself again. My name is Miracle. This is my name sign. Sorry, I missed earlier. I would love to respond to this question, of course. In my country, it's a 50-50 or yes, 30-70, 60-40. But in 1988, the deaf people in Nigeria were facing a lot of challenges in regards to needing interpreting services from the government, education, medical, anywhere. And we continued to bring this to the attention of the government and knowing, right, how are deaf people going to be communicating? And they focus very strongly on speech. And it's really important that we were able to explain what we needed. And it took many years, but in, I want to say it was 1994 is when things started to progress. It's still not provided 24/7. Sometimes it is very limited. And of course, right, you can't always have just one interpreter for multiple hours. And so you may have different interpreters. But it was a good start. And then maybe an interpreter would come and they would need to leave, and it was just not consistent. If the government, hospital, schools, or something, they were able to provide interpreters, and the government would pay. Before interpreters were paid, we had to ask for favors and ask for people to help, but also to the state, depends on the state. And we would ask for the camera to be on the person, the interpreter. We would check out the news. We'd have to kind of just try to read lips. And then sometimes they'd have an interpreter. Sometimes there would be an interpreter, but then even if there was an interpreter, they wouldn't put the camera on them. And so we wouldn't be able to see them. But I think it's really important to be able to show that deaf people understand, and to see that news of what's happening is really important. And that's why the government is moving along. We're not there yet, but I have seen improvements over the years. But we are, again, making progress, and looking forward to see what else happens in the future. Yeah, and that's something I think that we all seem to be struggling with, and the same challenges, and hopefully there is more improvement in the future. So thank you so much for sharing. And now I'm going to turn it over to Crystal. Crystal.
Hello.
Yes, it's so interesting how their stories, learning about it, the government recognizes the language or not, what they've seen over the years.
Absolutely. And that's why, it's so important. It's critical that we need access, or, right, we need accommodations. not just me, not just the deaf and hard of hearing community, but other people as well. And I'm going to go ahead and take question number 2, but thank you so much, panelists. Also, audience, thank you so much for being here. I just love what I'm hearing. I love what I'm learning. And let's go ahead and move on to the next question. So your country, do they have, laws for the disabled community? Here in America, we've got the Americans with Disabilities Act, right? Also known as the ADA. We're fortunate to have that here, but I'm curious about your countries. So not speaking about America, but let's see, who can we call on it? Let's get, let's see who. Maida, hi there.
Yes, sorry, can you repeat your question?
Absolutely. My question to you is, does your country have any type of laws pertaining to disabilities? Here in America, we've got the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that law provides services and accommodations for disabled people or people with disabilities, right? So it helps reduce and eliminate discrimination. Does Rwanda or Finland have that?
Yes, we do. It's people with disability human rights.
Oh, okay.
For people with disabilities. And so that's for deaf people, anybody with any physical disabilities as well. And it is through the government.
Great. Wow.
Yes, we're able to work directly with the government.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. All right, let's hear from another panelist. How about Hudson?
Hi. I think that Kenya does have a disability law, but there are many people who are not aware. They haven't read the law. And I think most people focus in terms of disabilities, right? For like people in wheelchairs, but not for people who are deaf in terms of using sign language.
Oh, really?
It's not really to require certified interpreters or anything like that. There's not a law for that. They are still working on it. But yes, there's no law like requiring interpreters to be paid or anything like that.
Great. Thank you so much, Hudson, for sharing. Next person I'd like to call is Zara. Come on back, Zara.
Yes, there was a disability law, like I just mentioned earlier. It was the Disability Employment Services or law passed in 1981, but nothing has changed since. And then also in 2002, there was a national policy for people with disabilities passed in 2002. And then in 2006, there was inclusion national policy for people with disabilities. And then the most recent one was human rights law for people with disabilities that was just passed in 2020. So we do have these, but we're still working on in terms of inclusion and wanting to make sure, right, that they're able to hire interpreters. Interpreters don't have to be licensed, though. Normally, as a family member of someone who knows sign language or of a deaf person, they can work, or someone, it's really like that 5% quota. So like for accessibility, if someone's in a university or something like that, they would, they print things in Braille, or they have the National Institute for Handicap. There are some other services like that. We have 4 providences, and each providence has 20 to 30 different schools for the deaf, or for people with disabilities. So blind, deafness, mental challenges. Each province, though, has 20 to 30 schools within their area. But there are services, colleges are starting to hire interpreters. It's kind of like, they're more welcoming to people with disabilities. There was the Board of Education that does provide now high school diplomas. So that's really nice, but there's a lot of things happening. And I'm not very involved. There's a lot more people who are actively participating in all of this that's happening. But there is like an ID card for people with disabilities. It says your name, it says there's a number, and they'll say if you have a disability or you don't have a disability, there's like a logo on here on the card. I'll have to find mine. But mine does say that I'm disabled. And so I get a lot of discounts for other services, or I get free things. I'll get like free hearing aids, free
hearing aids.
Yeah. Like I've told you, like, right, this is 1981, and they were focusing a lot on hearing and speech. So there's speech therapy, they provide hearing aids. There's different services. And I have a monthly stipend that I receive because I'm disabled. And there is a lot more that's being offered because of that law that was passed in 2006 for people with disabilities. So they are the government is providing a lot more now to people. But yeah, still a work in progress. And like I mentioned, I'm not that involved, but I have been able to benefit from the services.
That's great. Thank you so much, Zara, for sharing. I mean, holy cow, so much information that we're just taking away from all this, but free hearing aids. Wow. And I'm going to ask you more about that later. But thank you again, Zara. And so now I would love to hear let's hear from Monica.
Thank you. Yes. Like some have mentioned, right, the laws, just in June, there was a group for people with disabilities, and like wheelchairs, people who are blind, anyone who has disabilities, right? The government now recognizes that they are the ones who are making the decisions for themselves. And people with disabilities have been able to move up in the ranks and, not just tell us what to do or what we need, but they said that, we'll see how that goes in the next couple of years. I'm hoping that we'll be able to get some funding to be able to allocate to more of these groups who are having issues, and that we're able to provide better services for ourselves.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much.
But yeah, it's still, like I mentioned, it's still really new. So we'll see how it kind of pans out.
Absolutely. I mean, that's amazing though. And next I'd love to hear from, thank you again, Monica. So let's hear from Natalie.
Hi, yes. Colombia does have disability rights for people who are in wheelchairs or deaf, blind, and other people who are disabled. But there are different categories, right, for people who need support agencies or who need other services from the government or other opportunities or anything like that to gain access to services. There is also another service providing services and just mainly on education, right? Education online or other courses that people are taking, or if they're involved with any other company. There are services and courses also for people who are deaf or blind. There are a variety of services included in this law saying, you know, that there must be teachers allocated who know sign language for deaf children, and that there is a way to accommodate a specific need. Columbia has all of that and it's written out really well, but in terms of it actually being provided, you have to still ask a lot. And if a deaf person goes up to the teacher and the teacher is talking and we don't understand what they're saying, right? We're supposed to be accommodated, but the teacher can also be creative in making things visual, putting things on the board, having pictures, and explaining things. And it's just a different process though, still, but it's good.
Thank you so much for explaining that. Yeah, just the different time and that it took to find access. Next, let's go ahead and hear from Miracle.
Yeah, I briefly answered this already, but I'll go ahead and answer it again. In Nigeria, we do have the assistance. We do have a law for people with disabilities. And it's been challenging. The government, there's no governmental support, and we have had to fight for what we have. The government eventually did, though, offer some support for people with disabilities in terms of providing food, providing assistance, and all of that, but not so much. Some is just enough to get by, some is just out of good luck, but like in America, I know they give out equipment, wheelchairs for people who need that, things in Braille for people who need that, hearing aids. Like if a blind person needs an assisted, any assisted devices to navigate. But I think mainly it's in the hospital or schools or places of employment. It really depends on the job, though, if something is given, if assistance is given. So this law in Nigeria, it doesn't include deaf people.
Wow.
Yeah, so it should. Deaf people should be included in this, but services are not given to deaf people because they see us as being fine, that we just don't hear. But not being able to hear, right, is we consider that a disability in terms of needing support. And we have fought for it. We have explained what we needed to do and still haven't gotten much assistance. So it's been tough. It's been a challenge, but it has gotten better over the years.
Right. Yeah. And so when you think about that and proposing different laws and fighting for things, so thank you so much, Miracle. Let's go ahead and bring Kayla back. Kayla, where are you? Ah, wow. Hearing from all of these panels, what do you think about that so far?
I know it's really heartbreaking to see how much people have had to fight for basic rights to access. And I've seen that in a variety of countries, right? There's been more emphasis on speaking and listening, hearing aids and assisted listening devices. And there's been a huge emphasis on that more than learning and using sign language, even for better access.
No, exactly. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Let's go ahead and continue.
Okay. We have some time now. We're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break. So let's be back at 7.
7 sounds great.
Okay. We'll be back in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, we're going to have to make sure you 10 minutes,
yes.
guys. We'll see you back in 10.
This is West Coast American time. So 7 o'clock. We'll see you all back in 10 minutes. And I'll now turn off your cameras.
10 minutes, guys. We'll be back in 10.
This is West Coast American time, so 7 o'clock. See you all back in 10 minutes. Now turn off your camera. See you all back in 10.
And all right, we'll go ahead and start up again. Sounds good. We'll wait for everyone to go ahead and turn back their cameras on. If you feel like dancing, right, feel free. We'll give it one more minute before we start up again.
Crystal, do you want to go ahead or you want to wait to announce?
I say let's go ahead and continue. Yeah, take it away.
All right, I just wanted to share. Go ahead.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and step away. Let Kayla take it over.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to share before we continue that Miracle had to step away because of a family emergency. So just wanted to let you know he will not be with us for the remainder of this event. So I want to thank Miracle for joining us for as long as he could, and really appreciate his input and the views, and for sharing more about accessibility and deaf rights. And hopefully we'll be able to see him again at a future event. We're waiting for a few more panelists. Thank you. Okay, I think that everybody is back now. Thank you so much. Now, from your personal experience in your country, do you feel that hearing people in your country are deaf friendly? Why or why not? Just kind of wondering what your experience is. I'm going to go ahead and bring forward Hudson first.
Yeah, so in terms of my country being deaf friendly, right, Kenya, I would say part of it is deaf friendly. They provide access. And when I say access, I mean, maybe you go into a restaurant and there may be someone there who does know Kenya Sign Language, or, you know, they know that I'm deaf and they'll start speaking to me and we'll figure out a way to communicate, whether that's writing something down so that we can communicate. So that's a great example of being deaf friendly. But in terms of, you know, things like travel, public transportation, having to pay for, you know, things like that. When you think about needing to go somewhere and other people are speaking and, you know, things are very transactional and I may not know where to go. I may be asking for directions or what bus to hop on or how to get to some place, or I might, you know, gesture the number 5 or 3 or something like that. And I'm trying to pay for an item and people are still just talking, right? They won't show me, right? They won't show me or write anything down or index something or reference something. And I may try and work with them to communicate, but some, you know, some cities are kind of far away and I'll need that help with direction. So going back to the idea of that place where there are laws and work does require recognizing that deafness is a disability, and whether, you know, you're deaf or you're blind or you have another disability out there, oftentimes they will hire a majority of hearing people. You don't see a lot of representation from the disabled community. When it comes to the, you know, there's around 90 to 95%, I think, of the people there are able-bodied hearing people. They do hire people with disabilities, but in terms of hiring deaf people, you don't see a lot of that happening. But yeah, I'll let you go ahead and ask someone else. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, that's very interesting in terms of public transportation. And so I'm glad that they're willing to figure out a way to communicate with you. It's very interesting. So thank you for sharing.
Happy to share.
Next, Monica.
Hi there. Yep, that's a great question. So thinking about, I remember, gosh, was 8 or 18 years ago, I remember moving and thinking about access and things like that. And at the time, there were laws about awareness. And I remember talking about, deaf awareness. So thinking about sign language, I started to see that there was a small recognition for it. Once COVID hit, things became more worldwide. Obviously those numbers grew, right? There was more access, more interpreting, more information shared with the deaf community to be able to provide that information, which I thought was kind of interesting as a change. So when you think of England and also other countries out there, like Moroi, for example, they do recognize the language, and because of that recognition, they are considered very deaf friendly. Going into a store, oftentimes people are recognized as that deaf customer, deaf patrons. When COVID hit and we had to have masks on for safety reasons, it was challenging. Thankfully, there's no longer a mask mandate, so we have that ability to see a person's face, which is great. But yeah, I think definitely it would be more deaf friendly.
Happy to hear that too, that it is deaf friendly. That's really good to hear. Thank you so much for sharing. Zara?
Thank you. Oh, hi. Sorry, you're asking me. Oh, no. Sorry. Interesting. Going to the idea of, hearing people here being deaf friendly. Now, when you say deaf friendly, do you mean, talking about like at a policy level, at a governmental level, or, I would say no, there's not a lot of deaf friendliness there. However, when it comes to people and the community, right? People will gesture to try and understand a deaf person because gesturing is more things like that are visual, like food, eat, fever, or hungry. Like food in my belly, trying to convey to someone, I'm just hungry and trying to get food. But when you think about our sign language, it's definitely a lot more gestural in style. So when you think of spoken language in comparison to how we sign, it's kind of easy to understand, right? There's not a lot of problems there when it comes to the barriers. As far as changing laws and fighting and advocating for rights and things like that, I would say no, that the government is definitely not deaf friendly at a national level or a governmental level. The idea of inclusion and including deaf people, because they say, oh well, deaf people can't read or write, their literacy skills are not up to par, and how that impacts us at large. I mean, when you think about the whole country, it's unfortunate, the lack of literacy skills. So thinking about that and how hearing people do have access to information, and it's almost easy and seamless. But going back to the idea of Pakistan being at the institution and things like that, the school systems need to get better. There's not a lot of access there. There's no schools for the deaf here. There's no teaching a deaf child how to read or write. So how can they learn how to read, right? How can they? When people say, well, how can't you read? Why can't you read? How can you communicate? The important thing is, yeah, you have to learn to read or write, but yeah, at the end of the day, communication is most important. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have the same issues here in America, honestly. Not every state even has a deaf school. Not all deaf and hard of hearing people know how to read and write.
Right.
It's unfortunate. It's a really sad situation, and hopefully we can improve that for every country. And so thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, exactly. The idea obviously of gesturing is important because at least, but it doesn't supersede reading and writing. It's still important to communicate. you have to teach and have those kids be able to go to school, because it's going to impact them severely later on.
I agree. 100%. I wish that people were more aware of that right for deaf children, and no matter where they are. But thank you so much for sharing. Natalie, please. Hi.
Hello. Yeah, so here in Colombia, I would have to say, let's see, how do I explain this? When you think about the capital and the government, yeah, or the city, right? Definitely deaf friendly. There's a lot of advocacy when it comes to education and things like that. But there are other communities out there that are not so deaf friendly. You'll see a lot more oppression and marginalization, right? There's a delay and lacking when it comes to providing education and services. There are not enough interpreters, right? And so there is some awareness and recognition, like, oh yeah, I see that there's this deaf person and I know that they use sign language, but it being deaf friendly at large, not so much. We've worked and we fought, and we need advocacy and allies. And oftentimes deaf people here in Colombia are told, well, you can't hear, therefore you can't do. So there's a lot of people here that are friendly. Of course, I don't want to ignore that, because they're good humans. But there are some, who maybe are concerned about deaf people seeking employment and have a little bit of discrimination there, right? It's awkward.
Right, and that deaf and hard of hearing people, right, knowing that people can be deaf friendly. Some don't know what to do when they meet a deaf person, but we are always there to educate, and hopefully knowing that people's situations won't be as awkward in the future.
Yeah, and some know how, right? But some people that are hearing see the variation in deaf, right? That not all deaf people are the same, and recognize that there are different levels of skill, right? And other people have that same common perspective, like, oh, all deaf people can't because they can't hear.
I agree with you. Yeah, that is an issue that a lot of times people believe that deaf or hard of hearing people can only, that everyone is the same. Everyone's ability to learn, ability to read and write, or to sign is the same. Some people only know home signs. Some people are fluent in ASL. And I think that's something that we need to continually educate the communities about.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for sharing.
You're so welcome. Hi. So when you think about hearing people being deaf friendly, not everyone. Some people are, and it just really depends on the person. Like it depends on any person. It depends on their attitude. Do they have a good attitude? Are they friendly? Are they willing? Are they an ally? They want to work with us or for us or against us? Right. Some people, say, well, hey, can you speak? Can you lip read? And there are some communication barriers there. But in Rwanda, education is not really something that is encouraged, right? It's just lacking in a lot of different ways. And so it's like, well, deaf can't write, deaf can't read. I'm hearing people are like, we're against this. And I'm like, well, there's some hearing people out there who can't read and write. So we're kind of on the same playing field. And we're just kind of at heads with that. Another example would be before we talked about, how the bus was mentioned and transportation. Now, thankfully, there's a new bus system that's being used with, it's almost kind of like a card or an identifier. And you don't need to know, well, how much is it to get to this place? Is it 100, 200, things like that? You can scan this said device and it will just take the money that you need depending on where you're going, which makes it easy. So technology has helped in a lot of ways. If there are hearing people out there that, want to just know that it's important to work with, right? When you have a family or a friend or something like that, that helps. They become kind of that pseudo interpreter connection to help make things friendlier.
Right. And having to rely on family or friends to help with interpreting and to make it easier. But at the same time, we wish too that more hearing people would be able to accommodate us, right? Being deaf or hard of hearing, we often have to do a lot of the accommodating. And I wish that it would be reciprocated.
You're right.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Who is next? Okay, I think that was all the panelists. I will now turn it back over to Crystal.
Hello, everyone. Okay. So hearing from different panelists out there explaining their countries. Right. So we talked about things being awkward. It's the same for here in America too, right? And one experience I'd like to kind of share was, I remember, before moving on to the next question though, I want to remind the audience here today who's watching, if you have other questions, please go ahead and go onto that YouTube chat feature and we will see your questions there and get them to the panelists. Thank you for that. Are you guys ready for the next question? You know, regarding things like employment, sports, social media, you know, yeah, any other kind of public organizations out there, right? Facebook, Instagram. And when I say sports, you know, I'm thinking things like basketball, football. Having those things in mind, my question to you is, does your country provide reasonable accommodations for the deaf and hard of hearing community, for the deaf blind, deaf plus, various disabilities? I remember last year, the NFL, right, the National Football League, they actually invited 2 deaf performers to perform at the halftime show. Those halftime performers were supposed to be on stage with the performer. Last minute, we end up finding out that these performers were kind of placed in a corner. So we were all there ready to watch the halftime show on TV. And the deaf community was like, where are the performers? Where are they? Where's the access? And it turns out you had to go to this website, and then it took you to another website, and then you can watch them on a secondary device and see them perform. So my question is to the panelists, you know, do they provide different reasonable accommodations? So let's go ahead and ask Natalie.
No, there's no access in terms of football or anything like that, but yeah, no.
None.
We should, but there isn't. I don't know why there's not. But what other sports do you say?
Anything like soccer, football, any of those?
Yeah. Did you mention any others?
Yeah. So do you have any kind of access or fair and reasonable accommodations like on social media, right? Like maybe there is a speaker. Is there an interpreter available?
If the president is speaking, yes, there's an interpreter next to the president. It really just started this year to have the interpreter next to the president in the same shot so that they could be seen.
Wow.
No, before there wasn't. Yeah, they were in like a small picture-in-picture frame, or they weren't on camera. Yeah, there was nothing.
Terrible.
Now it is. So I want to thank you so much I give thanks, to the interpreting community, the deaf community, and also to the government for making that happen. For news, for public news, for private news is still really hard because they have to pay for it themselves. But for just like the regular news that it's government, like it's governmental support, they do allow that. But at the same time, it's only on the weekends, nothing during the week. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, for like concerts or anything like that, they will have, it's not on stage. There tends to be like in the back, there's in a different section, and they have speakers that you can put on
Oh,
so you
like
can
a
actually
vest or
feel the
something?
music. Yeah.
Huh.
What other? Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much. I'm really happy though that when it comes to president's announcements and things like that, they do provide that because that's really important. Having, maybe deaf people have questions as well with what's going on in the world. So thank you so, so much for that.
Right. You're
And
welcome.
yeah, so let's see who we should hear from next. Let's hear from Hudson.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. For work, there is some access provided, like at a public place, if there's access for people who are in wheelchairs. But in terms of for people who are deaf, they do provide interpreters sometimes. But sometimes people aren't willing to pay for the interpreter. So if they're going for a job interview or something like that, they may have to find their own interpreter. If it's a big business, oftentimes they will provide interpreters. They have the technology, they have the funds to provide interpreting services. But oftentimes, deaf people are training their friends, or it's kind of like, if I'm giving a presentation or something, I may have to talk to other deaf people or people who could interpret. They don't have to hire everyone, just like 50% like of people that are disabled, but it depends on the funding. But also oftentimes if it's a blind person or a person in a wheelchair, they're still communicating via spoken language and not with a deaf person who would need an interpreter, because they don't want to hire the deaf person because then they have to pay for the interpreter and then communication can't be had. But they don't want to hire the interpreter always. And so then, before people, it's almost talking about being able to read and write, which of course, right, our native language, our natural language is sign language. For sports, I'd say not everything is provided. I'd say mainly for governmental things, there are interpreters. They will hire an interpreter because we had to fight the government for that support.
Oh, wow.
Some of the government actually went to Brazil to learn more about access. You were talking about social media. I would say like Instagram, Facebook. But for Facebook Lives or anything like that, there's really not captions. Or if someone's, a political person is trying to gain voters or something like that, they don't have captions for that type of information.
Oh, I didn't think about that. Wow, it's. Whew.
But yeah, oftentimes deaf people have to bring their own interpreter to events. And so we have to make sure that we just provide our own accessibility.
So, they have to be a qualified, certified interpreter or just someone who can sign or, so you had just said, obviously, the interpreter has to be certified, right?
Well, we have some interpreters who are certified and other interpreters who are not certified, but they tend to be the ones who are willing to volunteer to interpret. we want certified interpreters to be more included and for accessibility.
Oh, interesting.
But that's not always the case. Yeah. But the interpreters that we have, that we can have come and interpret for us. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Wow, thank you so much for answering and sharing. Next, I'd love to call Monica.
Great. Some of the same issues that we experience here. Yeah, no, it's not always provided, and especially for sports. For social media, we see like the auto captions.
Oh, interesting. Auto. Okay, so like in cars? Wait, what do you mean?
No. Like on Facebook.
Okay, I get it now. I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean like auto captions, right, that are just embedded in the videos. But for some media, they will have an interpreter provided, and that's government funded. But some other times they don't provide interpreters. So it really depends on the setting and who's willing to pay. But yes, the government is willing to pay for some stuff. But yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. Hopefully in the future, though, we can tell the government and remind those people.
Right. It's always about who's going to be paying the interpreters, and the government's willing to provide for some things. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Monica. Next, I'd love to hear from Zara.
Yeah, if you're talking about deaf friendly, I would say that many are aware of deaf people and are willing to help and are sensitive to helping. If we need to make a phone call, we can ask somebody and tell them what to say, and they'll go ahead and make that phone call and interpret. So yes, I say friendly in that sense. Relatives, quotas, tend to be willing on their own time to interpret, or if someone's at the hospital or something like that, they have a doctor's appointment, they are willing to help, but it tends to be a family member or a quota friend or something like that who is willing to interpret. If there are programs being offered, may ask a family or friend to come and interpret, and oftentimes they'll be willing to come interpret. But they're not getting paid for their time.
Right.
So we will exchange services. Like maybe I can buy them food and they'll accept that in lieu of payment.
Right, because you want to be fair for their services.
Yeah, I want to thank them for their generosity, and they're giving us their time. And so I will give them food or something like that. It's kind of how we're able to pay them, quote unquote, for their services. And if you don't know who to contact, if you need an interpreter, you have to ask around, and
it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's to say, how do we get an interpreter? Is this interpreter good? How much is it going to cost? And oftentimes everyone's concerned about the cost.
Right. How long is the interpreting going to take? How many hours will the interpreter be there?
Right. Where are they going to go? Who do they contact? What agency? How much does it cost? It's all of those things. And I think now too, for interpreting agencies, like I had mentioned before, there are two different agencies or associations. If I have to call them, now they're providing trainings to banks or different other places of employment, like sign language training. at banks or other corporations, other businesses that want more deaf employees. So they're able to provide sign language workshops and things like that. And so they'll go out to different places of business and provide those trainings. So I think that's going in the right direction. It's a positive step. There's more deaf people in banks, factories, offices, and they're starting to understand more about sign language and learning more sign language. So it's been good to see in the courts. They are now providing interpreters.
Wait, that's just now being implemented?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, governmental places of business. They now have to provide interpreters. And a judge won't listen to a case that from like through a relative or a friend. They want it directly from the deaf person. And if the deaf person can't read or write, then they'll get an interpreter. If they can't read or write, then they have to write back and forth. But if they can't read or write, then you have to get an interpreter. They want to make sure they're making the right decision based on the case that they have to hear.
Wow. I mean, just thinking, that's kind of surprising, right? Because oftentimes you would think that, if you can't read or write, then, I mean, that happens sometimes other places in other countries when you think about a deaf person being in court. So thank you so much for sharing that. You know what? Next, I think what we should do is bring Kayla back on.
Hi. Okay, so I wanted to go ahead and let you all know that I'm going to be sharing one more question from me and Crystal. And then after that, we have audience questions. There are a lot of questions coming in from the audience who is watching via YouTube. So we'll go ahead and ask those out to the panelists as well. The final question from D to C is, when or if we were to visit your country, are there deaf or hard of hearing service agencies or organizations? So here, our organization is a local nonprofit, the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Service Center, who provides services to deaf and hard of hearing, deaf plus, people with disabilities, also people who may be autistic or have learning disabilities or vision difficulties, whatever those disabilities may be. And we're able to help families who have deaf or hard of hearing children. We teach the family sign language, we teach communication skills, we provide resources. So I'm just wondering if your countries have any nonprofit organizations or agencies. We can bring Hudson up first. Hudson? Okay. So if you have one also, where is it located if you have an agency?
Great question. Yeah, so in Kenya, we have, where I live, it's a town called Nairobi. And so we do have a deaf agency. And the name of that agency is the Kenya National Agency for the Deaf. Yeah, and they focus on advocating and fighting for access, for equal employment, for resources, for parents who may have a deaf child and they don't know where to send their deaf child to school. So it's a great center.
Do you feel that in your area that you need more agencies or organizations, or do you feel it's good enough to provide services for your entire area?
Actually, in the past, we only had the one, and it was enough. It provided, suffice services. And that was kind of the one that now we have one that ended up turning into multiple satellite centers. So when you think of other states, right, they all have their own national agency, or not national, they have their own local agency, but they are all under the umbrella of that main agency, but each state does have their own. So here in Nairobi, we have ours. There are some service centers out there that are great and some that are kind of just okay. Reason being is, maybe the first time it was set up was great. And then later on, deaf people started to send up their own agencies to focus on, things like maybe female support, or maybe they wanted to focus on the GBV or domestic violence and abuse for battered women, right? So when you think about other things growing, like education focus being a primary one.
But yeah, like teaching
There
classes.
aren't a lot of class teaching Kenyan Sign Language. When they find out there's a deaf child, oftentimes parents don't know where to go to school or where to learn. Thankfully, we have those agencies in place. And Kenya does have places for parents of deaf children to go to provide things like hearing aids or assistive devices, or like you say, sign classes that deaf people can benefit from as well as hearing parents.
That's interesting too. Thank you for your feedback. Yes, I'd like to bring Monica forward, please.
Great. Yeah, so New Zealand does have a lot of different services for education, for employment, for people who are blind, for a multitude of different services out there. And as far as location goes, there are so many, because New Zealand is small, but the population of deaf is pretty large. So when you think of different regions and areas, whether it's north, south, east, or west, we don't all work together. We try to partner and collaborate as much as we can, because that's important. But when you think of parents who are maybe in rural areas, there's not a lot of collaboration with other satellite centers. Hopefully, in the future, we want to see more partnership. We want to see the government give, grants and money and funding to these different agencies out there. We think the governments need to invest in things like hearing aids and cochlear implants to provide that kind of change, as well as sign language classes and education for the deaf community, because we need that support. But most importantly, we need cooperation from the government, in my opinion.
I'm wondering then, why do you think that the agency is not willing to, agencies aren't willing to work together?
Honestly, I think it's a competition thing. Like, my work is mine, your work is yours. We're going to keep it separate, but they should be working together. They're small, right? And when you think about the deaf and the hard of hearing community, deaf blind community, we all are still the same community. We're under one group. So why not work together, right? But it's that business mindset of money and funding and mine, right?
I'm wondering too, which area, like where in your country do you feel there, or is there a good city, a particular city to get services?
Great question. So in my opinion, I am in Osgood-Gandhi,
In
and
Auckland.
that's one of the biggest cities. And we're, there's another one called Wellington, and then so it's pretty big when you think of the country of New Zealand, right? But my area, there's got plenty of interpreters, there's a lot of jobs, there's a lot of deaf-friendly events and things like that. But the more south you go, the harder it becomes. If you move to another area, there's other people who can't afford to move, right? Or maybe they live more farther away. So there are pros and cons depending on where you live.
Mm.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you can't afford things, then you have to move, but you need money to move, and you want to be near interpreters, but those are costly. Thankfully, technology, we've got Zoom, we've got other technologies out there. So technology does help people stay connected and informed, but yeah.
I think it would be hard too, because there's pros and cons. And when it comes to working with an agency that's providing access. Yeah. So thank you for that.
Thank you so, so much.
If we can bring Zara forward, please.
Yeah. So, can you see me? Sorry, my device here. There's so many nonprofits here in Pakistan. Yeah, there's a lot. Too many to name for sure. So you can go, you can fly, you can drive and seek different services, but there are a lot of different organizations out there depending on what you need. But the thing is, you need to reach out, to people who maybe have traveled to other countries as well, right? And you have to kind of build those connections, and you have to do that if you want to get the best result, because there are a lot of places out there, a lot of nonprofits, a lot of agencies, I mean, who are like me, this is my work, my money, come here. I don't want to partner, I don't want to work with other people, zero collaboration happening. And I don't understand that. So my suggestion is, when you travel, right, look around and see what the world is doing. Focus on the person, thinking about other countries out there and the experiences that those people have versus what we're doing here in Pakistan, thinking about communication and the relationship. Yeah, for me personally, right, I run a nonprofit school here in Pakistan. And so I've been doing that for 14 years. And I grew up here. And, I've gone to America. I went there for high school. I graduated from a high school in the States. I came back here for university, and then I traveled again to go to get, pursue education, higher education. And then I set up this place in 2008. So there's been struggles and trials and tribulations, and not all agencies work together. There's a lot of competition, and I don't understand why, if we all have the same goal. Thinking about people and putting people first, right? More than money and opportunities. But we need to expose people. We need to inform and be on Facebook and put things out there. But how can we think about things more globally, and think about communication being the way and being the primary goal? Right. So I would say travel. Yeah. That's the best way, is you have to see what's being done out there, because I learned through experience.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you so much, Zara. And we know that the audience, if you're interested in traveling, it's really good to get an idea of the organizations and the different countries. So thank you so much for that advice. Natalie?
Sorry, can you explain that question one more time?
Yeah, sure. If we were to visit your country, what area of your country do you feel like there is a nonprofit organization or agency that helps deaf and hard of hearing people, if you have one?
Oh, okay. I still don't really understand. So are you saying, are you talking about America providing services for Colombia?
No. So for example, if you were to come and visit America.
So you're talking about Colombia.
So if we were to go visit Colombia, do you have any agencies that you would recommend?
Okay, got it. That makes more sense. Perfect. So yeah, obviously there's a lot of access here, right? Colombia typically does provide services. I'm trying to think of an example here. Online services, right? There's not a lot of equipment being offered. As far as interpreting for the deaf community in schools, you don't see a lot of that, right? There's just you go to school, you get a certificate, and you're done. If you want to go to a college or university, you need an interpreter for that. But you have to study a lot to learn a lot. Interpreters out there, and certified deaf interpreters in Colombia as well. It's, again, highly competitive. So you want to encourage that, people can do that. People can pursue higher education. I do wish, though, that people would have the experience to go and see other countries, right? And then compare to what Colombia has as far as access and legislation. But I think that does require traveling to be able to see it.
Right, in your country, if they were able to get more organizations or agencies to provide help.
Right. And to keep that in mind, the government does recognize different agencies and things like that, but the government doesn't always provide funding. Things like cochlear implants or hearing aids or wheelchairs, there's no support with that. The government, you have to pay out of pocket yourself for those kinds of, equipment. when it comes to hearing people, okay, the government will give it a little bit of funding for interpreting services and things like that. But if it's private, I have to pay out of pocket. If I want to go to a university, I have to pay that interpreter to attend school. And it's a lot of work, right? When you think about, we don't have SSI here in Colombia. We don't have any kind of Social Security benefits provided to us. They don't provide that. So it's hard for deaf people to seek employment, right? Because they often think deaf people can't, but then we can't get a job to make money to then pay for these interpreters, right? So it's just a catch-22. At the end, we need more support for deaf people at large.
Right, and struggling with having those services near your home. And hopefully that will change.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Maida?
Okay. So yeah, I mean, if you want to travel to other countries like Rwanda or Finland, oftentimes people will look at a disabled person as almost like not equal, right? Like, oh, you're deaf, but you maybe don't need agencies, right? So oftentimes when it comes to the deaf community, deaf women, there is a NWD, which is nice. And then if you were to visit Rwanda and maybe you want to go to school, you need to go through the NWD agency because you can get a lot of information there and get a lot of explanation on services and benefits and things like that and what is offered to the deaf community, but it's not a lot. So oftentimes, you focus on the disability, and so it's challenging, right? But you need to focus on the agency. And I mean, so Rwanda, it's getting better, but we need more awareness out there. We need people to know. And unfortunately, we only have a small number of agencies here, and especially even just agencies for women too.
What about in Finland?
Well, Finland is different. A lot of people know about deaf people in the deaf community. And when you think about agencies, right, when you think about the language, but there's deaf agencies out there, and there's deaf-centered agencies, and there's agencies for deaf-blind, as well as other satellite agencies. So when you think of hard of hearing, deaf, cochlear implants, hearing aids, all of that, it's there, but they're all separated. In terms of sports and other things as well, there are agencies out there that provide those kinds of accommodations, but again, we're talking Finland here, not Rwanda. So yeah, I've had to find that out.
Thank you for sharing. I'm going to go ahead and start now with the audience questions. Thank you again. Okay, for the audience questions. First one, specifically for Zara. The question is, there was recently a bombing in Pakistan, and there's been a lot of issues with finding shelters. How has that impacted deaf people in Pakistan?
There's no focus on the deaf community, right? There's no, as far as the bombing and things like that goes, there are a lot of floods and things like that happening right now. That's more of an impact. I would say it's, maybe 2 provinces now that are completely flooded. So we don't have any information for the deaf community on what's going on, in the villages. I'm not sure how you guys sign villages. Okay, yeah, so our local villages, there's not a lot of happening there. There's not a lot of information being shared. As far as a bombing goes, we have the internet and things like that, but the community seems to be safe to my knowledge.
Well, that's good.
yeah, when you think about government buildings and big landmarks, those are what's bombed, not small villages where we are, right? Not little towns and things like that. More just big governmental establishments and, things like of that nature. But we get it bad when it comes to rain and flood. Like last month, we all were highly impacted by a flood. There was so much that was lost. Property, houses, just there was a lot of illness that took place after that, and the deaf community suffered, right? I saw a high number of deaf children in those different villages, but they couldn't communicate, right? There was a lot of misunderstanding. There was a lot of language barriers because they did not have education, because they're just home with their family and they don't have access to information. Sad. Those organizations that are out there, that I was talking about, the deaf organizations, they're now trying to find people in those villages that were impacted. They're out there trying to help, finding a way to communicate and help provide food or clothing or shelter or even medicine. Medicine is crucial, but right now, I mean, there are a lot of people that are in contact trying to find out who needs what and how can those agencies and organizations help. I've got one friend who, she's deaf, and she's been trying to find information out there, but she feels lost.
Yeah, thank you to the audience member who asked that question. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Oh, okay, thank you. All right, the next question. How do your cultures in each of your respective countries, how does it respond or interact, I guess, with the use of eye contact and or facial expressions and gesturing for deaf people? If anybody can answer that. Go ahead.
Yes, we rely heavily on eye contact as well as the use of facial expressions, because it's part of how we communicate. Without eye contact, especially when you think of deaf culture, it's critical because it's a visual language. Eye contact is a norm for us. However, obviously in America, you can kind of look at someone and then you'd look away or things like that, but still the importance is critical. There are no, boundaries or things like that. We have to look someone in the eye to let them know that we're listening and that the other person is being heard. And so facial expressions, of course, is important. You have to show what you're thinking. You don't want to be polite, but you have that close connection between eye contact, facial expressions to convey different meanings, thoughts, and feelings, right?
Yes, thank you so much. Would anybody else like to respond to this question as well? Okay, the next question from the audience. Sorry, go ahead, Zara. Sorry, go ahead.
So if you come to Pakistan, whether you're male or female, but men and women tend to be separate when it comes to social interactions. Men and women will not, men will not look at us. Some men who do look at you give you kind of those elevator eyes. It's maybe someone that has never seen you before, but if you're doing services or things like that, eye contact is very brief, and then you just kind of continue and go about things. It's not like you're locked in eye to eye. that's what, the culture is here.
Okay, thank you for sharing. The next question. Oh, this is an interesting one. Some countries forbid or don't allow people to drive. Maida? We can get Maida spotlighted. There we go. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, so obviously in my country, deaf people were not allowed to drive. Some deaf people really wanted to drive, but at the same time, like I said, we fought and fought and fought for different rights. They would not allow deaf people to drive because they were so focused on the fact that deaf people couldn't hear. They were like, oh, you're going to get in an accident. I can't give you permission to drive. You can't have a driver's license. And deaf people, some people learned how to drive from friends or family or other things, and they drove just fine, and they were able to get that license. Other countries, for example, like Rwanda will allow a license, or other states will let deaf people drive, right? So you have that license and then you can drive in those other places. However, when it comes to police checks and traffic stops, they may look at that and say, oh, this looks a little different. And they'll say, no, you're not allowed to drive. You're not supposed to be driving. And then you end up having to pay a fine or things like that. Or you might get a warning, a little slap on the wrist. There are other deaf people who live in Europe and they have licenses. They can drive just fine. And maybe a police person will stop them and see that it's a deaf driver and say, hey, deaf people can't drive. And, and you'll show that you have this like European driver's license and say like, I can. And they're like, no, absolutely not. Deaf people are not allowed to drive. You can't hear. You're not supposed to be driving.
Right. And if they are caught, do they have to pay a fine? Or are they arrested?
Police, obviously, I think, it depends. But if that deaf person is caught repeatedly, they might end up, getting their car repossessed. Or maybe do some, I don't know if they would be put in jail or anything like that, but I think mostly they would lose the car.
Yeah, I think the audience would be shocked by that. But thank you for sharing. Let's see, we have one more question for Natalie, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. Go ahead.
So far, the last 15 years or so, the deaf community has fought, but they will not allow deaf people to drive and get a license. Over time, we've made some improvements. If you have a hearing aid and or a cochlear implant, then you can. But just recently this year, the government has opened it up to allow any and all deaf people to drive. However, if you're taking a taxi or riding a bus, or if you want to take someone to school or things like that, the company cars and other examples, right? They don't allow deaf drivers. So deaf people are still fighting for those kinds of jobs and opportunities. But deaf people who use, cochlear implants or things like that, they're like, well, I'm deaf, but I don't use a cochlear implant or any kind of device, and they're not allowed. They may want to buy a car and things like that, but they'll take the risk of getting caught. There's usually no fines or things like that, but the deaf community is fighting for the ability to have a driver's license with or without cochlear implants. Maybe you need to just have a car and get to work, but there's a lot of oppression that we're still facing here in Colombia.
Wow, and knowing that was just still recent.
And I want to say recent, like June recent, they finally opened it up for certain deaf people to be able to get that license.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. It's shocking to see what's happening in other countries. We can bring Crystal back up, please.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so first and foremost, the time is running out. We are soon going to be coming to a close, but I want to thank each and every one of the people here, especially the audience, people who've been watching from home. Thank you so much. I do also want to thank the panelists for sharing your time, your wisdom, your knowledge, your information, your experiences, your struggles, and everything you've had to go through on that deaf journey. Also, I would like to thank our team and our sign language interpreters who've been working hard to make this event happen. Round of applause to each and every one of you. Lastly, don't forget, remember we talked about Valley Dev Fest coming up this November. Remember, time is approaching. We want to get those discounted tickets. Kayla, anything else we want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add thank you so much to the panelists. You guys all had fantastic answers. We really appreciate your time and your patience in joining us for the event this evening. We know especially all of the different time zones that we had to coordinate to make this possible. But thank you for being here with us during our Deaf Awareness Week and our final event for the week. Thank you so much.
Yay! Thank you, everyone. I'm dancing. I'm going to keep dancing with my friend. Hola, hello, ole.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone.